actually find like a spot to shoot in because it's like it's so brightly lit. Like you chose 1:30 p.m., which is like the worst possible time to shoot.
Well, I knew 7 would be better time, but like better time for light, but not better time for me to be alive and talking. Like
they offer 7 p.m. or 7 a.m.
Was 7 a.m. is what I think was offered to me.
Yeah,
like, me getting to the city at 7 a.m.
You would look your best. Like you would have this natural glow, morning.
I would have glow. This natural sleepy look.
But so yeah, I wanted to chat with you about like all the developer stuff that's happening because like Twilio IPO and Xamarin got bought, and like you and I we've been developer startups for a long time.
Yep.
But I kind of feel like it's still a world that's very poorly understood. Like what are developer startups and specifically kind of marketing in developer startups, which ends up being a very different beast in my experience at least.
Yep.
To like the regular marketing that people may find a lot about online. So
yeah, I think very very different.
Yeah, so you've been, at a bunch of them. You're at Realm now. You did Heroku before. You were at Sencha, which was, really also popular with developers, and Apple. And so kind of you've seen many different generations, I guess, of developer marketing overall and marketing in general. And so I figured we'd chat a little bit about that, and let's talk a little bit about why people even do developer startups in the first place. Like, why is that a thing in Silicon Valley?
Why is it a thing? I think a lot of people see the opportunity around a platform. They just see a much bigger opportunity when you're talking to developers. You're one level down from the app level. So when you're talking to developers, you're talking about monetizing what those developers then build. So I think, if you can do it, it's harder to do, but if you can do it, the opportunity is much bigger. Right.
And so we mean stuff like, for example, like right now, Uber is trying to have a developer platform, or, Adobe is like trying to have a developer platform with PhoneGap. Like it is like this idea of having a platform business that relies on developers. It seems a very appealing one. And the most kind of financially obvious example is maybe the App Store, right, with Apple and Google Play, where literally they don't produce any of these apps or contribute in any sort of way beyond the distribution and some APIs.
Yeah.
They just kind of really make a lot of money off of like applications being developed, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so it's a big model, right? And definitely big business, billion-dollar business in case of some of them. But it seems to have like different shades of gray. Like I always like to think about it like, you may think like Twilio and GitHub and Xamarin in the same business of doing developer tools, developer platforms, but that's not exactly true, right? There's many different shades of developer startups.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think you describe the difference between platform and developer tools. I don't think there's necessarily a bright line because a lot of the platforms have tools built in. But you can think about tools. I would say Xamarin is probably closer to the tools category than maybe something like Twilio is. Although I'm sure you could argue with that.
Right. It's not like there's a book on all this where people like establish those very strong lines, right?
When you build the product, you tend to cross the lines anyway because they're great lines, and you cross them when you actually build the product and you bring it to market.
Right.
I think one of the key differences though is really where you're trying to monetize and kind of who's making the decision. When you're building a platform that developers, you're going to walk into something. Okay.
Don't break the fourth wall, Paul.
Sorry.
I know. I had the same reflex. It's this tricks of like shooting outdoors. But so yeah, where the money comes from ends up having a big impact, right?
Yeah, and you can look at a model like Atlassian, where you have where they started really selling to individual developers. They didn't really have an enterprise model,
right?
And they just got a lot of adoption at the individual developer level. Developers said, "These are my tools. This is what I want to use to do my job," and that's really how Atlassian got up and running, right? Turned into what they are today.
And it's a big kind of different thing, right? And so it's like, there's this kind of big collaboration tools like Atlassian or GitHub. And then you also have, a lot of service plays like Twilio, that kind of make smaller chunks of money on a subscription basis for specific APIs, specific services. And this kind of like, big, heavy infrastructure stuff, which is like typically enterprise plays of like, let's sell gigantic corporation, a license for like this database or this application framework of some sort.
Yep.
Yeah, and so you're right. It's kind of very, very blurry, but they do have kind of some specificities, right, in terms of how you make your money and how you relate to, I guess, the application lifecycle the developers are building.
Yeah, and I think that you asked the question, why do people get into this business, or how do they get into this business? And when they get into the business, even if they start at that individual developer level, they usually want to move into that enterprise place, because of the reasons I said. There's more money there. It's just that's where the big dollars are. But why do they start where they start? Is usually because these entrepreneurs are developers.
Right.
So they understand the problem space well.
Right.
The people they're hanging around with are developers. You know, that's who they measure themselves against.
Right.
So to solve a problem that is then adopted by lots of their peers, it's just very attractive. You know, it's like it's a space that feels natural for them.
Yeah, it's true. It seems like, you know, like a lot of entrepreneur stories, like it's driven by passion, you know, first and foremost.
Yep.
And it does seem like it comes from, you know, usually from a technical place of like this problem needs to be solved. It's a pain point developers have. And it does seem to be, you know, kind of core to also like marketing those companies effectively, right? Where you know, it seems like, you know, there's a lot of startup where you're like, you can kind of create needs or you can create categories, you know, and kind of, solve a problem that maybe isn't there. But at least the perception can be when it comes to developer startups, is like your tool has to be real. It has to solve something real, and it has to be this very elegant, proper solution. Yeah. Right. Would you agree with that kind of basic framing of like, you know, how to get out and build developer tools and actually convince people to use them?
I would agree. I think that the standard for developer tools and platforms, anything developers use, is pretty high. And it's really high on the utility scale. It's like, is this thing useful? Is it better than the other things out there? It's really like, how good is the product? And, you know, it's very competitive. It's like, if you build something that's pretty good, there's a bunch of other developers out there who might think, oh, I can build something better. Right. And then they go build that better thing. You know, you don't have that in the consumer space. Like if you're building apps for consumers, like consumers aren't saying, well, that's pretty good, but I'm going to go build something better. Right. They don't have the ability to, right? They're downstream from that development process. Right.
And that's also maybe why you see a lot of competition, right? And it's like very, very dense. It's very rare that you have like, you know, only one NoSQL database, you know, and you know, I apply that to whatever sub-industry, right? And it seems like, you know, sometimes also you have this problem in that it's not just, you know, competitors kind of coming out, but it's also like your customers or your ideal customer, ideal user will be like, you know what, no, I don't need to use the application framework. I'm going to make my own, and I'm going to like, you know, do that instead of using this. So you're right, there's this very, very high bar to utility, but still, you know, let's be realistic, right? I think, you know, coming into this world, I remember being like, oh, I don't know, like marketing doesn't work on developers. You know, it's all about having a great product and like what are we talking about? But that's not true, right? Marketing does work with developers.
Yeah, I mean, you know, marketing works on developers. It works differently. I usually, people tell me marketing doesn't work on developers. I say, okay, go anywhere where there's, you know, like 20 developers, 20 software engineers working together and walk around, and then walk around again 6 months later and see how many developers have new headphones. Right. Developers are very susceptible to certain kinds of marketing, and they buy new headphones every 3 to 6 months for reasons I can't really discern, right? So somehow they are susceptible to certain kinds of marketing, and the key is just to understand what that is. Right. Look, the product's got to be good. You can't have marketing can't carry you in the developer marketing in the developer market. You actually have to have a great product. Right. But then how do you get the developer community to understand it's a great product? How do you get them to actually try it? Right. How do you get them to really think about it the right way? That's the job of marketing.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I would say maybe it can carry you for some time, but, you know, not usually forever. And so, you know, it's like to bring out all the haters out there, I would say, you know, MongoDB might be a case study of that, in my opinion, where, you know, it was like a great company, great developer message, and, you know, great marketing plan for sure. But then, you know, the product had very typical, I think, issues of just growing up and being exposed to a larger use base, and the marketing kind of really couldn't cover that. And now you kind of see it losing a bit of traction. I'm sure they'll do great and everything will be fine. But, you know, there's only so much marketing can do sometimes before you lose the coolness, right? Before developers move on to something else. And that's maybe another aspect of that audience, right?
I think that's true. And I think it speaks to this alignment between really three things. It's where the product is, where the company's marketing is, and where the market is. Right. It's like keeping a sense of like those three things and trying to keep them as aligned as possible is really the key to success. If your marketing gets ahead of the product, that's a mistake, because now your marketing's not credible. You're marketing things that maybe don't really exist. And that's going to kill you in the developer market. If you're marketing ahead of the market, you're just like putting messages out there that nobody's going to receive. Right. And if you're marketing behind your product, then you're not really doing your job as a marketer.
Right. So that can be really tricky. But so, what are some of the stuff that concretely works? You know, I kind of feel like you know, people like to think of like concrete kind of programs or things they can do, and so, I don't know, my experience has been, for example, like content marketing, you know, works pretty well with developers. You know, what are some of the things you think that are like usually good tools to have in the toolbox when it comes to like trying to get your message out there in front of the developer audience?
Yeah, I think content marketing is a great way. I mean, it's fundamentally experiential. You want people to try it. Right. And if it's good and you try it and you give them the right framework to understand what it is they're trying and why they should like it, I think you're in a good place. So you can use content marketing to bring a lot of attention, awareness to what you're doing, and maybe get more people to do that trial. But unless you get that initial adoption, you're not really going to succeed at marketing to developers.
So again, we're getting back to this idea of like product still being key, right? So you know, you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, that like, you know, use your product a lot, I guess, in your marketing. You know, get people to try it, get people to experience it, even if it's indirectly through a demo or through a meetup or through something like that, right? That tends to be the best way to convince people rather than like blah blah.
I think so, but I mean, there's also much more kind of one-to-many ways of doing it. I think the web experience of like how you actually discover the product, how you understand it, how you get access to it, really critical. Removing any barriers to people trying it is really key. And you know, sometimes those things fall between the cracks because it feels like, oh, maybe that's the product team's job, or maybe the product team thinks it's the marketing team's job. Fundamentally, it has to be done. I think it actually is. Marketing has to really care about that whole user experience, the onboarding experience to get started, and even the user experience of like the out-of-the-box experience of the product. And while marketing doesn't drive that, marketing is a key stakeholder there and really has to influence that.
I agree. It tends to be like something that's seen as like a pure engineering or product concern. And you know, when it comes to developer stuff, it's so critical. It's really hard to not have like this gigantic loss in your funnel and experience if you don't have this onboarding. And also explain where you see so many developer startups have, you know, free tiers or be strongly open source or at least open core, right? Because it's all about like that ease of experience, right? That ease of getting started with it. What about pure marketing programs? Like, what do you think, you know, works well? You've been around, you've done all these things. You know, I've seen like, you know, Heroku do big conferences. I've seen meetup plans. I've seen, you know, tons of different things. So what do you take away in 2016 in this day and age of like what works with developers?
I think events work. They're expensive. Events are really about events are like fighter pilot school, right? Like what you spend a lot of money to put on a good event and you deliver great experience for a relatively small number of people. Those people need to be like the best and the brightest in your developer community. That's what you're trying to do. And you're trying to influence them. You're trying to turn them into advocates, keep them really close to you, with the idea that each of them is then going to go out and influence 100 or 1,000 other developers. You can't, like, unless you have a lot of money, you can't really do a heavy event strategy and touch a lot of people. So you can do a great event and reach the key people, the key influencers in your community, and grow from there. You know, developers are no different than the rest of us. They're busy. They hear about something cool, they try it out, and then they get distracted and they forget about it. So things like retargeting actually work, right? It's a classic consumer marketing technique, but it actually works. It's like, oh, I visited your site, I signed up for your thing, and then I forgot about it. Well, retargeting reminds you about it. It not only reminds you about it, it does that other thing that marketing needs to do is it helps you, give you a framework for thinking about it. It tells you what to think about it. And that's just makes it a little bit easier for you to get over that adoption curve and do that onboarding. Yeah,
for sure. And I've definitely also seen like a lot of traditional marketing actually translate well. Usually it's a question of like, you know, copywriting and creative and kind of nailing that. You're not doing, you know, it the same way that you would for consumers, but sometimes advertising works depending on your kind of value proposition. I've definitely seen email marketing work pretty well with developer audiences, even though it's something, you know, you would expect developers to like not like email or feel like it's very spammy.
The spammy question is really a question of tone, right? And so if you're talking to developers as if you're a developer, if you actually understand that tone, you have the right people writing the copy, doing that, it doesn't feel like marketing. If it feels like marketing, they will have a bad reaction to it. It feels like spam. But developers talking to developers, that's what they thrive on, like any other community, honestly.
Makes sense. Yeah, absolutely.